Alleged abductions of humans by aliens have been around since the early 1960s. Betty and Barney Hill, a middle-aged New Hampshire couple, were reportedly snatched up by aliens in a flying saucer and eventually had their memories blocked. Since their case was made public, thousands of others alleged abductions have been reported all over the world.
This is Betty and Barney Hill. It's a very famous case, took place in 1961. There's a whole book, The Interrupted Journey, television movie, The UFO Incident, starring James Earl Jones. It was September 19th, 1961. Betty and Barney were driving home to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, which is on the coast between Portland, Maine, and Boston, from Montreal. Driving through the White Mountains late at night, nobody around. Betty spots a strange object. Barney was driving. She's looking out her side. A light in the sky, moving, following the contour of the mountains. And she watched it for a while. She wasn't going to say anything.
Suddenly, we began to see a strange light in the sky, which was maneuvering in a very erratic pattern. This light began flying along beside us and did this for about 30 miles until we came to an area known as Indian Head.
Took the binoculars, they're bird watchers, took the binoculars out of the glove compartment, looked over at it, and it was strange, and it was moving in a strange fashion. Finally, she worked up enough courage to tell Barney. It's late at night now, after midnight. Barney, there's a flying saucer out there. Oh, Betty, there are no flying saucers. Must be an airplane. He looks, probably a Piper Cub. Don't worry about it. You know what a Piper Cub's doing up there at 1 in the morning, I don't know, but she says, Barney, it can't be. Look at it. Look how it's moving. Look at the lights. Oh, maybe you're right, Betty. It must be a helicopter. A helicopter. There are no flying saucers. And they talk quietly as they're heading south in the valley. This is following the hills. And suddenly it moves out across the road.
And at that place, this light left the top of the mountain, came out over the highway, and stopped in midair directly in front of us.
Barney jams on the brakes, gets out of the car. He's bound and determined. He's going to prove to Betty there's nothing strange about that strange thing out there. In the first place, it's sitting still. It's just hovering. Less than 200 yards away, he estimates, 60 to 80 feet in diameter, just sitting there, and no sound. Sitting there. No visible external engines, no wings, no tail, no blinking red and green lights. He cranks up the binoculars. There's a double row of windows there. He's moved out away from the vehicle now. Suddenly, he gets scared because on the other side of the windows, looking back at him, are some strange-looking beings.
He panicked and he ran back to the car saying they planned to capture us and we had to get out of there. And we went speeding down the highway.
He burns rubber. He's getting out of there.
And at that point, we heard beeping sounds and the car vibrated.
They see a sign that says Concord, New Hampshire, 17 miles. Should have been 50 miles. There's a lot of other strange little details that you have to read the book, The Interrupted Journey by John Fuller, to get.
Now, when we arrived home, we had many puzzles. The tops of Barney's shoes were scuffed. Our watches had stopped functioning. There were highly polished spots in the trunk of the car.
Anyway, they report to the police that next day, who say, call Pease Air Force Base, which is just outside Portsmouth. They reported there. They hear about NICAP, a group that investigates UFOs. So a month later, a NICAP investigator comes out and gets their whole story. But he has them go over the story systematically. What time did you leave Montreal? How fast were you driving? How much time for coffee and gas? And what time did you get home? When they do it this way, it becomes painfully obvious that they got home at least 2 hours later than they should have gotten home. It's only 192 miles.
But the biggest mystery of all was the fact that it had taken us 7 hours to drive 190 miles.
It was suggested then that they see a hypnotist to find out what happened during the missing time interval. Well, they were both busy people. Betty, a social worker, supervisor in the welfare department, state of New Hampshire. Barney, working in the post office down in Boston, but on the Governor's Civil Rights Commission. Betty checks with a colleague. As a social worker, she knew lots of psychologists. You know, we seem to have this missing time. Don't worry about it. Your memory will come back. Just wait a while. So they waited and waited and waited and waited. And Betty had nightmares about strange beings kidnapping them. Barney developed an ulcer that got so bad he couldn't go to work. By now, 2 years have gone by, and they've got to do something. They got to get Barney back to work. Betty gets a referral, or Barney gets a referral from a psychologist to a psychiatrist, Dr. Benjamin Simon, down in Boston. And the idea was to take care of two problems at once: find out what happened during the missing time and get rid of the ulcer so he could get back to work. Okay, every Saturday morning they drive the 60 miles to Boston. Betty waits outside. Barney goes in. Dr. Simon hypnotizes him, has him relive, not retell, but relive with all the emotions, a portion of the experience. He tapes it, induces amnesia at the end of the session, so Barney won't remember what he said, can't talk to Betty about it, calms him down. Some of these are pretty powerful sessions. Sends Barney out, brings Betty in, does the same thing with her.
He said, I know it, but the others object. And I said, but this is my proof.
This goes on every week for 3.5 months, neither one of them knowing what's going on in the sessions, except that there must be something good happening because Barney's ulcer's taken care of. He's able to get back to work. Finally, Dr. Simon figures they're ready. He brings them both in together instead of separately and plays back a composite tape of all these sessions. I've heard the tape. They're astonished to find that they had each independently relived the same incredible experience.
The beings that had been on the craft were now standing in the middle of the road, a dirt road, blocking our way. The car motor stalled. They separated, came up onto each side, took us out of the car, and at that point, I realized that they undoubtedly planned to take us on board.
Of that craft having landed, of them being taken on board against their will, treated as specimens. Stick a needle here, scrape a little skin there.
I was taken into the first room, Barney into the second room, where we were given, as the leader, as I call him, gave us testing.
No religious messages, no trip anywhere.
Our examinations were very much similar in that with both Barney and I, they checked our eyes, ears, nose, throat, took samples of our hair, fingernail, and they scraped our skin.
They were put back out, told they wouldn't remember, and didn't until this elaborate, sophisticated, expensive procedure was conducted. Now, let's face it, that's a pretty far-out story. Well, I read the book, The Interrupted Journey. I read the 2 Look magazine articles. I talked to John Fuller, talked to Dr. Simon. It was in my gray basket, not black, not white, maybe. Everybody needs a gray basket about UFOs. And then I had the lucky opportunity in November 1968 to spend 4 hours with Betty and Barney, just the 3 of us, in Pittsburgh, where I was living. I was very impressed with them. Obviously sensible, sensitive, intelligent people. Make a long story short, I buy the story. And you say, big deal, you believe them, where's the evidence? There's a lot of different kinds of evidence. I only want to focus on one part of it as appropriate for being here at the Space Center. Betty, under hypnosis, is reliving how she's trying to get the leader of this 11-being crew to tell her where he's from, and the understatement of the decade.
I said, I know you're not from this planet.
Now, Barney was in another room. They were being examined separately. So finally, to get her off his back, this leader shows her what I can only describe as a 3-dimensional star map. It was like an aquarium with points of light which were supposedly stars, 3 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet. 3 different kinds of lines connecting these stars for trade expeditions and occasional expeditions and regular heavy trade. 2 big circles that were supposedly the base stars connected by lots of lines. And she's looking up at this thing, and she asks the leader, well, where are you on the map? Wise guy alien, he says, do you know where you are on the map?
I told him no, that I knew nothing about astronomy.
How can I tell you where you're from if, where I'm from if you don't know where you're at?
I just didn't have the necessary knowledge.
Now, poor Dr. Simon, the psychiatrist, world-class expert on post-traumatic stress syndrome using hypnosis to unlock what happened. I mean, it's bad enough he's got 2 intelligent people here telling this crazy story about a saucer landing beings taking him on board, but now he's got a star map and trade routes, oh boy. He asks if Betty can remember what the map looked like. She says yes. He gives her a post-hypnotic suggestion. If and only if she can remember it accurately, please draw it later on. She goes home and she draws, and you can see it here. This is what was published in the book. And it's kind of fascinating. Trade routes and occasional expeditions, but there is one little teeny tiny problem. What does it mean? We have no reference point. It's obviously not all the stars in the galaxy. It's not all the stars in the neighborhood. We'll never know, is what people thought. Maybe it means something, maybe it doesn't, but there's no way to find out. Well, a brilliant woman named Marjorie Fish had read the book. She was curious. She didn't think aliens would look anything like us, and they seemed to be sort of humanoid. But she visited Betty and decided, well, there was one thing she could do. She could build a three-dimensional model of our local galactic neighborhood and see if she could find a three-dimensional pattern that matched the two-dimensional one that Betty drew. Well, it turned out she's now built a total of 26 three-dimensional models. The point of doing this now is that the stars are where they are. They're not randomly distributed. If we build a model, we can look around it from all different directions. What's difficult about doing this is we have great angle data on the stars. We know where to aim a telescope to see a particular star. 2 angles tell us. But we don't have good distance data. Astronomers aren't going anywhere. It doesn't much matter how far or how close along this line of sight. But you can't build a model without the distance data. Now, Marjorie thought she'd get many fits to the map. She got none until she built a new model using the newest data, the Gliese catalog, Wilhelm Gliese catalog of nearby stars, had the best data ever compiled on the distances. She rebuilt the model, and lo and behold, there was the pattern, angle for angle, line length for line length, what Betty had drawn. It was a special day for Marjorie, believe me. Now, here's one of her models that matches the star map. Now, there's several special things here you have to understand. First is a local neighborhood. The biggest model only went out 50 light years or so right next door. Second, all the stars connected with the lines are the right kind for planets and life, sun-like stars. And all the sun-like stars in this very well-defined three-dimensional volume of space are in the pattern. Now, the chance of that happening by accident, remembering that only 46 out of the 1,000 stars in the local neighborhood are like the sun, and yet every one of the pattern stars is a sun-like star, and every sun-like star in this volume of space is part of the pattern. The chance of that happening by accident, 1 in 10,000 or 1 in a million, depending on whose statistics you believe. Several special things now. One, the pattern makes sense, near a star, near a star, near a star. That's good, not back and forth. Two, strangely enough, it turns out that all the pattern stars are in a plane. It's like pepperoni on a pizza pan, thin pizza, all in a plane. Rather than raisins in a big fat loaf of raisin bread, which is what you'd expect, that they'd be distributed all over the place. Nobody knew that before Marjorie's work. Most important, nobody doing what Marjorie did before Betty had the experience in '61 or the book came out in '65 could have come up with the same identification of the stars, because the correct distance data wasn't available until 1969. Obvious question. Where did Betty, a social worker who knew nothing about astronomy, get the right information as to where the stars were in 1961, when nobody on this planet had that information at that time? The only possible explanation is that it came from somebody from off the Earth. We can see that the source of that information had to be somebody who'd been away from the solar system. None of us Earthlings have been, so far as we know. Even more intriguing, I suppose, is the fact that this work tells us where those particular aliens originated. Here's a map that shows the names of the stars in our very local neighborhood. Our star is the sun up in the top right-hand portion of the picture. Now, we're out in the boondocks here. The sun is 4.5 light years from the next star over. There's not many stars behind us for 15 or 20 light years. We're out in the boondocks. The base stars, however, are 37 light years or so away from us. Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 reticuli, that's the Greek letter Zeta, and the constellation Reticulum. You can't see it from here. You've got to go down the equator or below. These two stars, Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 reticuli, are only a few light weeks apart. They're 100 times closer to each other than our star, the sun, is to the next star over. 100 times. So from a planet around one, looking over at the other, you can see the other star all day long, and with a not very big telescope, you could directly observe planets around the other star. Now, it wouldn't be surprising if there were earlier interstellar between the stars travel, when your nearest neighbor is only a few light weeks away, as it is for them, as opposed to our situation of several light years. Especially when I tell you one of the key features about this star, these two stars, is that they're about 1 billion years older than the sun. Billion with the B.
Just quickly, yes or no, do you believe in extraterrestrial life conceptually? In the probability or at least possibility?
There are 24 of us that left the Earth and came back.
Well, you know what
and there are 12 of us that walked on the moon.
But how about things with, you know, like green and...
Somebody who originated someplace else.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Just...
Why not?
Well, okay, why not? That's a good enough answer. All right.
But we don't know. No,
So again, would it be surprising to any rational person that beings with another sun-like star just around the corner would get started sooner on interstellar travel when they've got a billion-year opportunity for a head start? Very exciting piece of work.
I received a copy of the radar report from Pease Air Force Base, where they had tracked an unidentified craft at 2:14 a.m. Just about the time we estimate that the UFO left. We went back and we found the spot where we were captured. It was not a fantasy. It was a real experience. And I believe that I have enough evidence to establish that.